Welcome back to day one, part one, the morning of the EXP Expo, the first ever. We're joined now by one of my personal heroes, comic book writer, editor, artist. The dude co-founded Valiant Comics with Jim Shooter. We have the legend, Bob Layton. Bob, thanks for joining us, man.
Good morning, Kyle. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. So I have to ask the question before we get into the real nitty gritty here. Why did you choose comics?
Because I learned to read off of them before I started school. It was one of those things where the power of the medium was immediately brought to my attention because I remember bugging my sister Sue Ann to tell me what was in the little bubbles above their heads because it was the Jack Kirby and Wally Wood comic in the 50s, right? And so the storytelling was perfect. I could tell what was happening, but I got so curious to what they were saying. I was 4 years old. My sister sat down and taught me how to read. And as a result, I wound up skipping a grade of school, which wasn't all that great, by the way, because I graduated at 17 and I still couldn't get a job or anything like that. But the hook was in me at that point. The power of that medium, that made me want to learn to read was always there. But it's not just being a cartoonist or a writer or artist. I always consider myself a storyteller. So it's storytelling, and comics was such a powerful medium for telling stories, and that just put the hook in me from day one.
So, what came first for you, the writing or the drawing?
Well, the drawing came first, although I was always coming up with ideas and everything. But I actually started my career as a background inker for Wally Wood, because inking, you got to remember, we're talking about the mid 70s, right? And we got paid nothing back then. I mean, $20 a page if you're lucky, right? And you had to bang out, 22 pages, and you had like 2 weeks to do it. And as far as like penciling and writing and everything else, the easiest way for me to break into the business was as a inker. I worked for Wally Wood for about 9 months, and then Woody retired, and I went to work for Dick Giordano and Continuity Associates with him and Neil Adams. But mostly I worked for Dickie, because we both lived near each other in Connecticut. So, my intent was always to be the guy who does everything. Dickie always pushed me to be the guy that does everything, not just the comic side, but the business side of it too. He says, understand the business you're in. If you're going to do this for a living, understand the business you're in. That's why you've seen me on both sides of the desk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know just from talking to other people that you came to the industry, the big time, as it were, the same way a lot of guys of your era did through the zines. You were doing it yourself before before anybody knew who you were. You were doing it yourself.
Yeah, we were publishing. Me and Roger Stern were publishing in the back bedroom of my apartment in Indiana a little bi-monthly digest fanzine called CPL. And we discovered this artist up in Canada, an unheard of guy named John Byrne, and he joined us. And what happened with that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial life as well, because what happened after we put out a few issues, it became very popular. We started sending 20 copies up to Marvel and DC, hoping that somebody would read it. And it really, because we didn't have the internet back then, that was the way we kind of, as fans, communicated with the professionals. And so we started getting professional contributions, and we got noticed that way. But the magazine turned out to be like a who's who of the comics now, But this was 1973, like I said, me and Roger sitting there with a saddle stitcher, putting together little digest copies. Eventually,
I
what
did
happened
that
was,
one summer as a job. Oh,
yeah, I eventually made a deal with Phil Suling, who's the man who invented the direct market. And Phil Suling and Bud Plant got together, and they kind of financed us. They basically give us the money and they bought the entire print run, and half went to the East Coast, half went to the West Coast, and that's kind of my start in publishing. But it also got me, John Byrne, Roger Stern, and a bunch of guys into the industry.
well, and I think maybe the zine thing was a Midwest thing, because I know that's how a lot of the Detroit Mafia guys broke in as well.
Yeah, but also remember our sister publication was Etc., run by Paul Levitz and Paul Kupperberg out of Brooklyn.
There you go.
And it's like so, and we all kept in touch with each other, and it was really cool. And Paul and I wound up working together at DC later on. So it's been a long road, man.
So that was how you got hooked up with Wally and got to Marvel.
Well, kind of. What happened was we started publishing the Charlton Bullseye, which is a fanzine about the old Charlton characters that was sanctioned by Charlton Comics themselves, because at the time Marvel had Foom and DC had the Amazing World of DC Comics. So Charlton, who was trying to break back into the superhero biz market, they basically asked us if we would create a fanzine for them, which turned out to be more popular than a lot of their comics. But, again, it was another stepping stone. But what happened was, through that connection with Charlton, that we worked with Bill Pearson, and Bill Pearson was a very close associate of Wally Wood, and he's through Bill Woody saw my stuff and said if I was ever on the East Coast to come on out, and he could always use me as an assistant. Which, with $200 in my pocket and an old Galaxy 500 station wagon, I got in a car and I drove. Because I wasn't going to pay. Because the first comic I ever read was a Wally Wood comic, so there's serendipity there.
Right. The man tells you, "Hey, come visit." You start planning that second how you're going to come visit, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I've never been averse to taking risks. If you know anything about me, that I've never been averse to taking risks. That's how you get anywhere. So that's what I did. I had no idea. I slept first couple of weeks. I slept on Al Milgram and Walt Simonson's floor in their apartment in Queens. Until I could find a place to live up there. So it was like, because I met them at a Comic-Con or whatever, they were nice enough to let me crash at their place until I could find a place to live.
And that's an interesting thing about the industry at the time, is that it was you and Roger in your apartment, and then you're sleeping on the floor at Al Milgram's house, and everybody was so connected and we're so tight.
Oh yeah, in the building where Al and Walt shared an apartment, downstairs Bernie Wrightson and Howard Chaykin shared an apartment. I mean, it was and then there was a whole crew of guys up in Woodstock, New York. There was like Starlin, Barry Windsor Smith, a whole bunch of guys who lived up in the Woodstock area. Joe Sinnott. So there was a whole crew, upstate. A short train ride up there. There were like pockets of cartoonists all over the place.
I'm talking to Howard later. I'm gonna have to ask if he's got any apartment stories.
Oh, well, tell her about the first time he took the Goy out to have Jewish food. Because coming from the Midwest, I didn't know anything about, so he took great delight in taking me down to the local Jewish deli and give me matzo ball soup and show me how to eat a bagel with a schmear. I remember that.
Oh, I bet that's a story that I bet that's a great story.
Well, he was fascinated because you grew up in the Midwest, you don't know anything about culture, any culture whatsoever. There is none, right?
And I know Howard's a foodie too, so it was probably really good.
No, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. No, but this was Howard in his prime. Okay, he was just full of piss and vinegar, right? But he was also, he's always been like someone I just like totally idolized. I just thought he was absolutely fantastic.
So let's talk about your time at Marvel. I mean, you worked on some of the most iconic characters, but I mean, your run on Hercules, like that was a character that at that time maybe wasn't moving the needle as much as it had in the past. So tell me about.
There was no needle.
It's true.
I mean, what happened was the word came out that they wanted to try miniseries. They wanted to try, and I had been on Iron Man for a while, right? And I told you, I always wanted to work as a writer, so I saw this as an opportunity for me to work as a writer. Also, I was really kind of burned out with the whole dark Marvel universe. I mean, after the Dark Phoenix and the Frank Miller's Daredevil, and things were just really kind of gloomy there. And I wanted to do something stupid, something fun, And I remembered those old Thors I used to read as a kid, where Herc would show up like once a year, and they would trash New York for no particular reason. He would just get drunk and trash New York and beat the crap out of Thor. But that was always kind of an inspiration to me. It's like, okay, why is Hercules like this? Let's explore that. So I pitched the very first miniseries. I beat Wolverine by a couple of weeks. So I actually had the very first miniseries in Marvel history with Hercules, Prince of Power.
And then that led to more work with that character for sure. And that story sounds to me very similar to the story that Larry Hama tells about G.I. Joe. I wanted to do something fun, so I did it, and look what it did.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had one rule in doing anything: is when it ceases to be fun, stop, because that's the whole point of being in this in the entertainment industry. I get to work in my jammies, I mean, it's like, it's you do stuff that you're passionate about and you have a blast. And because I've walked off stuff because it just ceased to be fun. I mean, I had that with X Factor. X Factor was a Charlie Foxtrot from Boo. And, even though it was like, it broke all-time sales records, after 5 issues, I was done, because the politics around it was just untenable.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, in the people who worked on that book, I mean, you look at them now, and every one of them is considered a legend. Every one of them's a massive star. But when they talk about that book, they always go, and then they start talking about it, because it was such a. Well, I know it was such a political game,
because there was the office politics about it, because it was the first X book not done by the X office,
right?
And they set out to make my life a living hell. And like I said, and poor Jackson, I mean, I feel bad for Butch, because he hung in there through the whole thing. But after just having plot after plot after plot bounce, because you can't use this character, you can't do that character. Well, it just ceased to be fun. And, so it's like I moved on. Unfortunately, I got drafted into the Secret Wars because, I was on contract and I wasn't doing anything. And I had a quota to fulfill. So I always joked that I was the only person in that war that was drafted.
I like it. I mean, everybody wound up in the Secret Wars, but you were the only one who was there because they made you.
I was drafted. Yeah, I didn't volunteer for the job. I was definitely conscripted.
So you have one of the unique experiences, I think, and it was more common in that era at the mid to late 70s, of you were working for both companies kind of at the same time, right? You were working for Marvel and you were working for DC kind of at the same time.
You were scrambling just to get work because, like I told you, the page rates are so low. I mean, it's one of the really painful realities of now, because when you're doing this stuff, you don't really think that it's going to be considered classics or anything like that. And if I did a cover like for Iron Man, and I got $200 for the original, I thought I was just rolling in dough, right? And then I had a guy contacted me a couple of weeks ago and says, I have one of your old covers. I want $35,000 for it. You know anybody be interested in it? Sure, I'll help you out. You know, it's like,
Right.
yeah. I mean, there's that part always smarts a little bit, but no, back then you went $5 more a page, you sell your mother. You know, it's like it's the pay rates were so low. Most of those Iron Man that are considered classics, I did for $25 a page, and I got 2 originals back on every job. You know, because I fought for inkers' rights in the industry too. That was the other thing, because one of the first things I did when I got to Marvel and I was established at Marvel, during Iron Man, was I started fighting for the credits, because a lot of times most of the time I did finished art. I did embellishment, not just inking. But the bill as so and so artist, Bob Layton inker. And I'm like, am I not an artist? Am I something other than an artist? So you'll notice that in the late 70s, they started changing that to both guys as artists, or penciler, embellisher, blah blah. The credits started to change, because I just felt it was like not an insult just to me, but to Joe Sinnott or Tom Palmer, or you go down the list of guys who just add so much to what they do. Terry Austin. I mean, I go down the list. It was like, it felt like artist, non-artist. So
Sure.
I rocked the boat there. But
Well, and speaking about inkers, I think you're talking about inkers' rights and inkers' credits and that kind of thing. And I have this question. I'm talking to Scott Hanna later, and I have a question. I was going to ask this question to him. I'm going to ask it to you. Comic books don't look right if they're just blue lines, so you need an inker. So what is that process like? You get the blue lines from someone else, and you just...
I don't even know what you're talking about, because in the old days, we didn't have blue lines. People drew on the page pencils. With a big horse leg number 2 pencil.
Right. Pencils.
No, it was but part of wanting to develop as an artist, and something Dickie pushed me toward, was when you it's better to add, to actually embellish onto something. First rule is, if it's drawn wrong, fix it. I mean, so a lot of guys think their pencils are etched in stone, but if the foot is drawn wrong, you don't ink the foot the way badly. You fix it, right? And the really good inkers are also really good artists. If you go and look, you'll see the difference. The whole thing, how they do comics nowadays, is just escapes me. I don't even know how these guys function. But inking's kind of a lost art too. But back then, it was like, because you got guys like John Byrne or John Buscema or whatever, who were knocking out 5 books a month because they were doing breakdowns. But you needed a guy who knew how to draw to go in and finish this stuff. So it wasn't just a matter of tracing lines or whatever. It was really a matter of adding to it. I mean, like with you, I know you guys are going to talk to John Romita Jr. later, who I loved working with. I started at Marvel with on Iron Man, and after a few issues, JR just got he knew what I was going to do. He anticipated. He knew I was going to do all the shiny stuff and all the Zipatone things. So he left that to me. He told the story powerfully and left all the embellishment to me. But that's what you do when you collaborate.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. So is that something that, at first you would go to him and say, hey, can I do this? Or is that something that you just did and he was like, yeah, let's do more of that? Well, how does that collaboration work between a penciler and an inker?
Iron Man, I had a vision for since I was a kid. Okay. I mean, I used, the story Doom Quest. I drew that when I was 11 years old on notebook paper. Because the book always made me crazy, because I mean, I hated it. I always thought it was like a redheaded stepchild that Marvel just abused all the time. Okay. To me, I had a very distinct idea of what that book should be. And fortunately, like when David Michelai and I came over from DC, when we escaped just before the implosion, one of the books that they had on the chopping block that they tried new talent on was Iron Man. And so we were pretty much given carte blanche. I said, can we change some stuff? And they're like, Yeah, we don't care. We're going to cancel the book in 6 months. And that's how we got it. And David was a DC guy. He was never much of a Marvel guy, so he had no preconceived notions about Tony. So between the two of us, we were able to really just, well, you know, we came in the midway of the story, and Dave and I are looking at the story, and we couldn't figure out what to do. I said, well, let's just set off a bomb on page 5 and kill everybody. Which, if you go back and look at it, it's like 116. That's what we did. We actually just blew everyone up, you know. And then we proceeded to retool the book, the way I had always envisioned it, with him looking like metal, with the book being the emphasis on Tony Stark, not on Iron Man. Because I got to tell you, as a 15-year-old boy, I didn't want to be Iron Man. I wanted to be Tony Stark. I wanted to be the coolest guy in the room with the coolest clothes and all the toys and all the girls and all the money. Right. That's an achievable fantasy for a 15-year-old, as opposed to putting on armor and flying around and fighting with the Avengers. So to me, Tony Stark should have been a rock star. He should have been like Mick Jagger or somebody, or David Bowie. When he walks into a room, everybody goes crazy, right? And that was kind of what I wanted to bring to that rock star Tony Stark.
And it's I would say too, and you can speak to this certainly. That era of when you were on Iron Man, and then going forward, was when you first started to really see what I know as a graphic designer is the gradient kind of style of art, not the 4-color. Tony Stark is red and yellow. It's Tony Stark is red, but the red's got a sheen to it, and the yellow's got a sheen to it. Or
that was using shading films, the zips and stuff too. I use Zipatone as a color, and back in the old days, I miss that stuff, man. You can't get it now. Because of computer color made it extinct.
Right.
But, man, zip was fantastic. But in terms of doing metal, it was a perfect tool to use.
The people over at Copic make a nice blender that'll almost get you there.
Really?
Almost. Yeah, they make a nice blender.
Because every so often I'll do a recreation or something, and I can't reproduce the gray.
Yeah. They make the alcohol markers so that they're not.
I have Copic markers. I have been using my time in house arrest here to actually start coloring. I taught. It's so funny because I taught coloring for years at Valiant with the knobs there, but I never actually sat down and did it myself. So my daughter, who was a colorist at Valiant, has been tutoring me. So the last 10 months, I've been actually doing some coloring on my own. I just never had the time to sit down and do that. So I figured I'm going to use this time wisely and develop a skill that I haven't really honed yet. So,
they make a nice blender over there.
I'm adding colorist to my resume.
Hey, it's never too late to learn a new trick, right? We're going to see the complete Bob Layton written, drawn, colored, lettered. It's coming. I'm telling you.
No. No, Kyle, unfortunately, my days in comics are over. As much as I love doing it, I mean, I got out of the industry when they started the first Iron Man movie. I went out to Hollywood in 2008 to work on the DVD for Iron Man, and I stayed out there. So I started working in Hollywood, and then I started my own production company. And we were just about getting ready to go into pre-production on my first film when the COVID crisis hit. In fact, I was in Dubai with my business partners there, and my business partner there, who has diplomatic credentials and is a member of the royal family, he comes to me. He says, "I just got word that you have 48 hours to get out of here, or you're going to be living here for the next year." And so I had to scramble because I was there for the Bloodshot premiere. I was the special guest for the Middle East premiere of Bloodshot. And so I had to scramble to find a flight out. And so here I am. But as a result, pretty much my very first feature film, which is called The Helix, is put on hold until we can start production again, because we're shooting in Sweden, and as you know, right now Sweden's being just absolutely hammered with COVID. So because they tried herd immunity, it didn't work. Now they're really like they're in a bad way with that. So But we have all the financing in place. We have a star who I can't mention, A-lister involved with the project. So it's just a matter. We're hoping that we can get the cameras rolling by September.
So, give me the pitch on the Helix. What's the concept? What's the?
I actually originally I wrote this movie for Edward James Olmos and his production company. When I went to work for, as much as like Dickie was my mentor in comics, Ed Olmos was my mentor in Hollywood. Eddie kind of took me under his wing, and the very first project I wrote for him was the Helix. But as you know, in Hollywood, it's one thing to write a movie; it's another thing to get it funded. Especially at that particular time, it was very difficult. So. As a result, it didn't get made, and the rights reverted back to me. So, but that's I've written 9 movies. All right.
Wow.
All of them placed at one time or another, and that didn't get made for one reason or another. In one case, there was a movie where we were literally in pre-production when the finance company went bankrupt. So I had terrible, terrible luck. I had another one placed at Summit, and it sat there for 6 months waiting for them to do the development on it. And just about the time where they were going to get started on it, Lionsgate comes in and buys them and tosses their entire slate out. Stuff like that makes you wind up on a ledge wanting to jump, brother. Let me tell you, okay?
It's true, man. Have you ever seen have you ever seen the movie, I think it's called the TV set, the film set, the TV.
You thought
the tagline is
The Big Picture. The Big Picture with Kevin Bacon.
Well, this one, the tagline is Hollywood, where dreams go to die.
Well, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
The whole premise is that if you just keep plugging, you'll get there eventually. But you're going to get kicked a few times.
Well, when we finally make this movie, it'll be 10 years in the making. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's why I started my own production company, Box Monkey Pictures. Me and my partner Michelle Grant, we just decided that because I got tired of playing the Hollywood game. Like I said, I wrote 8 or 9 movies that are TV shows that never made it. For out of political reasons as much as anything. And finally, I just the only way to really do this is take control myself. So when I moved back to Florida here to spend time with my grandchildren, I also started my own production company and then started flying around the world. Because if you know anything about me, you know that me being home here for 10 months is just like hell on earth because I am constantly on the road, whether it's Comic Cons or a business. I'm looking for financing in Japan. I'm in Dubai, I'm in London, whatever, because I love to travel, but also, between doing cons and raising money for my production company. But to get back to your question, Kyle, the Helix is a psychological drama. Something I always wanted to do. The genesis of it was really quick. I came out of a movie theater after watching District 9. Do you remember District 9?
Good movie, do.
Right? But the trouble is, I'm a science freak. If you know anything about me, I'm a real science freak. I read Scientific American, since I was a kid. And so much of my Iron Man technology was based on that too. And if you know anything about what Stephen Hawking said about meeting intelligent life from another world, he said it'd be the worst thing that ever happened to us. And the movies always portray them as a version of us. Aliens are a monster version of us, or in that case, they were a dehumanized, marginalized version of us. But that's not what meeting life on another planet would be like in reality. So the Helix is a microcosm. It's 4 people that are on a survey ship that runs across inescapable proof of life elsewhere. And what happens inside the ship as a result is a microcosm of what would happen on Earth on a large scale. It's an interesting psychological drama. It's very, very people-driven thing. But what I do and how I do with 4 very divergent characters is I show what would happen if our cultures clashed. what would happen to us as a civilization. It basically turns into Lord of the Flies inside the ship. It's a very interesting drama.
I'm very excited to see it. Once you can get it running and get it going, let me know, man. I'm first in line to buy a ticket.
I tell you, like I said, I can't tell you who the star is, but he's terrific. Everybody knows him and loves him. He has been in a Marvel movie. I can say that much. All right. I'm very, very excited about it too. It's been so long in coming. So, and again, this is I think it's the best thing I've ever written. It's not comic book material, but it's me telling a story with my sensibilities and my sense. You will see Bob Layton's sense of humor. If you read Hercules, you will see it in the movie, okay? Because the movie has some very funny moments too, as well as incredibly dramatic moments.
That's something that's interesting when I talk to other comic book people or people who come from the comic book industry and who have moved into film and television, that those sensibilities that they picked up from having to work with these established characters and the sensibilities they brought to those characters really do translate well to that medium of television and film.
But comics themselves don't. That's the interesting thing. What people don't realize is like, oh, well, it's like comics, but it moves. No, it's not. Because there are totally different constraints. For instance, in comics, there's no room for nuance. Now, I know most comics nowadays are just nothing but talking heads anyway, but that's not the point. The point of it is when I was doing comics, there was never room for nuance. I could not spend 3 pages talking about my character's obsession with steamed broccoli. Like, oh my God, he loves steamed broccoli so much. It's like, that's all he eats. What's wrong with him, right? Because you only had 22 pages. In a movie, I can spend 3 minutes on steamed broccoli, if it's relevant to the story, and get away with it. You have room for nuance. And Eddie taught me that these characters move. He went through the first version of the script and just started crossing stuff out. He says, I can do this with my face. I can do this with a movement. It's like all the things that you would have to do in a comic to carry the exposition forward. An actor can do with a facial expression, with a movement, especially a guy like Ed. So I learned so much that they do not translate exactly.
No, and it's interesting too when you see people who go the other direction, who come from film and television into comic books. Oftentimes they can't pull it off.
They overwrite.
Yes.
Terrible. Yes.
A guy like Aaron Sorkin could not write an Iron Man story because it'd be 160 pages and he wouldn't do anything.
There wouldn't be room for art.
Right. So it's why I find Neil Gaiman's work so interesting, is that he has figured it out, but he might be the only person ever.
There are guys who have figured it out, and it's like I said, hopefully I'm one of the guys,
Yeah.
But like I said, I spent almost 10 years out there. And I did a lot of work. I worked as a ghostwriter. I did production art. You name it. And I was fortunate because Hollywood is a culture, and like any culture, you have to learn the language and the customs. And so I spent that time learning the language and customs of Hollywood. So I can sit there and I can talk bullshit with the best of them. All right, but it's and that was invaluable. But I don't really want to deal in bullshit. I basically want to be able to do a product that's pure. I don't want someone sitting there telling me my kid likes dogs, so why don't you give him a robot dog? It's like, I'm not playing that. So that's one of the other reasons why I have my own production company. So I don't have to play those games anymore.
So you talked about how Edward James Olmos was your mentor in Hollywood, and you mentioned Dick Giordano was your mentor in comics.
Right up to the day he died, man.
What was that like? Do you have any great Dick Giordano stories?
I have a million Dickie stories.
And here's why I ask. He is maybe my favorite Batman artist of all time. I can pick out a Dick Giordano Batman from across the crowded convention, at 1,000 feet. So
You just half the merchandise has Dick Giordano T-shirts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Half the OG merchandise on Batman is from Dickie, right? Yeah, absolutely. And he loved that character. He didn't like superpowered characters anyway. It was something that he could relate to Batman because what he wanted to do his whole life was westerns. He loved westerns because that's what he grew up with as a kid. But nobody was really doing westerns that, as a genre. That kind of disappeared from comics. But he absolutely loved doing Batman, and I was so fortunate to actually do a couple of Batman Elseworlds with him. Once we both retired, once I quit Valiant, it's so funny because the whole time I was running Valiant, he was running DC, right? And when I was at Marvel, he was in continuity. We never got to work together, even though he was my mentor from the time I was like 19 years old. We never actually got to collaborate on anything. So finally, when he retired from DC, I immediately hired him at Valiant to work there, but I was too busy to do anything art-wise with him. So after I stepped down at Valiant, I took a few years off, and then Dickie says, we need to do something together. So we went up to Denny O'Neil and pitched a Dark Knight of the Round Table, which was so much fun to do with Dick. I mean, he had the time of his life. I mean, between being able to work with me and work on a Batman story where they had horses.
Right.
He's like, we got to do something where there's horses. He liked to draw horses.
I remember reading that book going, this is one of the this is someone's passion project. This is something that somebody's been dreaming about for years.
Yeah, exactly. That was just, this is what we wanted to do. It's just like do something together that something that interests me, because King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table was what got me hooked on Iron Man. Because I read the Arthurian tales when I was a kid, and I really saw Tony Stark as that tortured king, and his kingdom being Stark, Industries. So, yeah, that was quite something. But he was, even once he moved down here to Florida and I was here, we would meet every Wednesday, first Wednesday of every month. We'd meet in Orlando halfway, because he was in Palm Coast near Daytona, and I'm over in Tampa. We would drive in and meet and have lunch once a month, just to talk and keep up with each other until he got sick.
I'm always interested when people talk about their mentors, and you've had two legendary ones that you've mentioned in Dick Giordano and Edward James Olmos. The best advice they ever gave you?
Dickie?
Either one or both.
Well, the story with Dickie especially was we were on a train going into continuity from Connecticut. Here's 19-year-old little Bobby Layton, and Dickie was there reading his New York Times, in his business suit and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there next to him on the train. I think I got a copy of like the Avengers, and I'm reading my comic book. And I remember Dickie kind of reaches over and pulls it out of my hand. And he kind of looks at me and he goes, "Young man, what is your intention?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Is this going to be your hobby or your job?" He goes, "Because if I'm going to train you, I'm going to spend all the time teaching you. It can't be both. You'll never be good at it if it's both." He says, "You'll never bring anything new to it. If the only thing you're assimilating is more comic books." He says, "If you want me to spend the time training you," he goes, you're going to have to find another hobby." So I got rid of all my comics. I sold them. People ask me, it's like, what about my collection or whatever? You're looking at it. It's like from that point on, and I think that he said, because as long as I keep bringing things from the real world to comics, like I would have a long career. I mean, it's been 45 years now. So it's like he was right. That he told me to learn every aspect of the business, which is exactly what Eddie said. He said, "Don't just worry about being a writer. Understand the medium that you work in. You know, it's like, it was so important. And he said, you got to understand what things cost, why people do the things they do, you know, you have to understand, because it's a very complex business. You have to understand all aspects of it. So both of them pretty much said the same thing one way or another, you know, to me.
It's true.
And
that's a great piece of advice for people who are trying to break into any industry. Learn everything.
Ed's so great because not only is he a great humanitarian and social activist, but I mean, he's a brilliant storyteller in his own right. Eddie understands the editing that he did on my scripts just changed the way I looked at everything. You know, I was just so impressed with him, and his heart is bigger than all of Mexico, man. He's like I met his son first, Michael. Michael and I became friends before I ever met Eddie. And Michael, I remember the first year I was out there, it was Thanksgiving, and I'm sitting at home in my shabby little LA apartment, and I get a call from Matt Olmos. He's like, Bobby, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm sitting here. I'm going to watch some football and, you know, eat some TV dinner turkey or something. He goes, no, you're not. He goes, get in your car. He goes, you're coming to our house. So, you know, he had me come out to Encino where he lives, and I had my first Thanksgiving in LA with the entire Olmos clan. It was fantastic. He just made me part of the family. That's why, you know, it's like I keep in touch with him all the time. And whenever I get a chance to get out in LA, you know, we get together. But it's like Ed's an amazing guy. I was so fortunate to have time with him.
So we haven't really talked about it yet, but it was Valiant Comics. You know, it's a company that has been around for a long time, and you helped start that. What is it like to see Valiant now with its movies coming out, and this company you started with? Let's not sugarcoat this, with some other legends in Jim Shooter and Barry Windsor Smith.
Well, what do you mean not sugarcoat it?
Well, no, it's like let's not skip over the power that Valiant came into the industry with.
Well, yeah, but you know, the stories vary and depend on who you ask. You know, my advice to you, seriously, is like, you know who has the true Valiant untold story is Fred Pierce, who's there now. But Fred, the original VP of manufacturing there, Fred was put in there by Triumph, the people who owned us originally, as an overseer, because basically, you know, the money kept disappearing, evaporating without much product. And so Fred came in to basically oversee where the money was being spent. But Fred will tell you, because he was there from Boo. But it was the best of times. It was the worst of times, Kyle. But Barry came over because Barry and I were like best friends. I was divorced from my daughter's mother, but Barry lived in the same town as her up in Woodstock. So we worked together at Marvel for a while, but Barry and I became like best buddies. So I would go up on weekends and stay at Barry's house and have visitation with my daughter, you know, and Barry's villa was like, you know, there's suits of armor and swords on the walls and stuff like that. I mean, it's like crazy. It was exactly what you think Barry Windsor Smith would live in, right? So he and I were very, very close. So when we started Valiant up, you know, he had really no desire to work with Jim. You know, the deal we made was that he would come there as long as he worked with me, because he didn't trust Jim. There was a lot of guys that didn't trust Jim. So, you know, Barry came up there primarily because I assured him that he, you know, things would be okay. And for a while they were.
And so what is that like we're starting a new thing here with the comic book shopping experience, the experience that we're calling it. What is it like starting a new comic book company?
Well, it's nearly fatal. I mean, I put myself in the hospital twice from exhaustion. I was putting in 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. because you're always shorthanded, especially with a startup like that at that particular time. Plus, like I said, we had problems with getting people to work there because, Jim's reputation had preceded him. So a lot of guys just wouldn't work with it. Okay. So I got the idea of just growing a lot of our own talent. So we found, I was raiding Kubert schools and I was working there and I found people like David Lapham, and Bernard Chang and Sean Chin. And a lot of these guys, we were just taking right out of the Kubert school and we're putting them there and teaching them on the job. That was the way I figured the best way for us to get it done is kind of do a mix of up and coming guys with established artists.
And you co-created Exo Manowar. You kind of I'm not even going to say kind of.
Harbinger. Mm-hmm. I co-created everything except Harbinger.
Right. No, that's where I was headed. If you see it from Valiant, your hands were in it, with the exception of Harbinger. But I wanted to ask about Archer and Armstrong, because that's a book that's taken on several different forms, but it's always kind of maintained that original playfulness and sense of humor that was part of it.
Barry's genius.
Well,
no, I mean, because when originally that was supposed to be a book that Barry and I would do together, and I don't want to get into it, but basically Jim broke that deal, and so the Steve Mazarski stepped in, and the solution was let Barry write it himself, and Bob will be his editor. So I wrote the first issue, even though I'm not credited. I wrote the first issue of Archer and Armstrong. It's just doesn't have my name on it. But after that, the resolution was to have Barry write it, which I was fine with because Barry's fantastic. So what I used to do as his editor, and the fact I would go up there, every weekend, is like I would sit down with Barry and we would kind of just talk out the next issue. And like for instance, I remember I came up with the idea and I pitched to him about the Ninja Nuns, like in issue 4. And he went to bed that night. He just hated it. He goes, "That's just ridiculous." And then he wakes up the next morning and he's like, "That's brilliant." I mean, he would do that. He would just have to mill on things, but we would sit down and we would talk out like where the book was going or whatever. And then Barry would just come back with the most outrageous, hilarious stuff. And again, the drawing was very unique to Barry. It wasn't his usual style either. It was very whimsical. It was probably one of the most fun 13-issue runs I ever had ever worked on with somebody. But it is uniquely Barry.
Well, guys, we got about 10 minutes left with the legend Bob Layton. If you have questions, put them in the comments. We'll pop them up. We'll try and get him to tell you stories and answer those questions. But one of the questions that I have and I wanted to ask about is your time with the Batman stories that you did separate from Dick. Particularly Hollywood Night and
no, that was with Dickie.
That was with I didn't realize he was credited on that. I apologize.
I was just the writer on that.
Okay, well, because that was going to be my question. Is I knew you wrote it, and my question was going to be having studied with someone who literally formed the character the way we know it today. How is it writing that character that's so precious to your mentor? Well, again, it was like his enthusiasm for the Batman was palatable. I mean, you could feel it. It was just his energy level would rise doing a Batman story compared to anything else he was working on, because he was always a journeyman. I mean, he would never turn down work. I mean, I have a mantra right now that there's not a day that goes by I don't think about it. But you can ask anybody who knows me, and Dickie's mantra was do something that furthers your career or makes money every day. That was his mantra.
So Dickie was not opposed to pretty much inking or drawing anything that people put in front of him, without question. Did he love it? No, not necessarily, but he did it because he was, it was always about the work. To me, it was always, I loved seeing his energy level rise. And like I said, when we got to do Batman, and when I told him the story of Hollywood Night, because he grew up watching those old Batman serials. So the whole idea of basing a story on those Batman serials just tickled him to death. You could tell he was very enthusiastic. You can see it from the art; he was very enthusiastic.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm thinking about it now, and I can see his fingerprints all over it, and I can't believe I didn't realize that was him when I was.
I also had a chance to put a horse in it, if you notice.
Hey, if we take nothing away from this day of convention, it's that Dick Giordano liked horses.
Just so he could do the horse. Yes, I added an old prospector to the thing so he can draw horses for one issue.
That's awesome. One of the other things I kind of wanted to ask about is that your time at both Marvel and DC, you took on some characters that were a little bit outside of what you would call the stereotypical character. So I'm thinking about Claw. I'm thinking about LAW. I'm thinking about Star Hunters.
Oh, the stuff I did at DC. You mean the stuff I did when I was struggling to make a living?
Well, I'm just talking about, and then, at Marvel, you have, again, we talked about Hercules, but John Carter, Warlord of Mars, and you worked on one or two issues of that? And then
I did the Dick Giordano thing, basically, because I was on contract. Once I came over and was on contract with Marvel, I had a page quota I had to fulfill every month, right? That was part of the regular paycheck and the insurance and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times, because I was very prolific, I'd wind up with free time. So I'd wind up picking up a book here or a book there to do. So if I remember correctly, John Carter was just one, because I grew up reading Edgar Rice Burroughs. And two, it was Ernie Colon, who I'd never worked with. And I was always anxious to work with somebody that I hadn't worked with before. I don't care who they were, as long as they were competent. But I was always very excited about working on a new penciler, because every time as an inker, you absorb something. Like somebody will figure out, like if I have trouble drawing a hand or something, one of these guys will have a way of writing the glyph, drawing the glyph in a way that suddenly makes sense to you. I mean, the biggest revelation of my career as an artist was when Barry had an automobile accident and he was confined to a wheelchair for a while. And he couldn't really, because he worked at a standing artist desk, an old 1800s standing desk. So I said, well, why don't you ink an issue of Iron Man over me? I said, I've already got it laid out. You could just, for you, that would be nothing. And he went in and he just automatically fixed everything that was wrong with my drawing, everything that I did wrong. And getting these pages back was like Moses and the tablets. I could hear choirs of angels singing because I suddenly realized all the things I was doing wrong. You can see almost a total change in my artwork from the time that issue came out, onward. It was just like, it was a revelation.
So we have a question from Kevin Stahl. He says, do you have a big regret of any book you chose not to work on or character you maybe didn't get to work on?
hey, two things. Yeah, two things. One, just before I left left Marvel for DC, this is like 77. Dave Cockrum, who was a buddy of mine from the fanzine days, okay, he used to send drawings to us when he was still in the Navy. All right. But Dave Cockrum was working on a bi-monthly book, which was every 2 months, right? It was the X-Men. He was like, he really wanted me to come over and ink it. So I did one issue. I think it was issue 105. And I'm like, first of all, I was consigned to team books for the whole early part of my career because none of the A-list guys wanted to do team books because there are too many characters. So I did it, and it's like, these aren't the X-Men I know. It's like these costumes are all hard. Some of them only a mother could love, or Dave Cockrum. And I can't make a living doing one book every 2 months. And so I took the deal at DC and I left. So I left the X-Men. 6 months later, it's like the number one book in the world, right? I mean, it just it takes off, and it's obviously Marvel's biggest seller for how long? For decades, right? So yeah, and when I was at DC, I wanted to do Adam Strange. Adam Strange was my Hercules at DC because I thought Adam Strange, growing up as a kid, was the dumbest premise ever. Where he was an archaeologist who would have to put on his costume and stand in front of the Macy's Day Parade as it's going on, get zapped to this planet Rand, where he fought giants, tennis shoes, and vacuum cleaners. And just every time he's about to get the girl, he gets cock-blocked and sent back to Earth. But they never explored the 28 days that he was on Earth, right? At all. And the fact that he pretty much was behaving as a crazy person. So I always wanted to do that. I never got a chance. I pitched it, but they never let me.
We have a question from John that I think is interesting on a couple of levels. With Bloodshot being out and a lot of people loving the movie, is there another Valiant character or comic you'd love to see be a feature film? And I'm going to add to this, since you're doing movies now, is there one that you would love to get your hands on and turn out yourself?
This is going to be hard for you to accept, Kyle, but please bear with me. I have very little interest in doing superhero movies. All right, because I have done that. I've climbed all those mountains. I mean, I have, according to the comic book database, 6,400 comic book credits. What mountain is left for me to climb? Plus, most of the concepts I have for film are not based on superheroes or superpowers or anything like that. So they're sci-fi, or there's elements of sci-fi or stuff in them, but they're not necessarily what I would call heroic fiction.
Absolutely.
I think Bloodshot. Everything's moved over to Paramount now, so I have no idea what Paramount's going to do next, because I know Archer and Armstrong was on the slate or whatever. Personally, Exo Man of War. I mean, Iron Man's gone now. It's like, Conan in a can, man. Who doesn't like Conan in a can? If people are now familiar with Iron Man, here is the antithesis of Iron Man. Everything that he's not, but they would get it. So to me, Exo Man of War would be I think the one that would really take off. I mean, I'd like to see Ninja, just because we don't have a really good spy now that James Bond. It takes them 10 years to make one movie. A real good spy thriller, with a super action guy. So it's like, Bruce Lee and James Bond mixed together. That would be fun to do, but Exo definitely, because I think the audiences are ready for it.
So we got just a couple minutes left. Tell people where they can find you on the social media. I especially want make sure to plug the production company so people can get updates with that kind of thing.
All right. Yeah. The production company is Box Monkey Pictures. And the website's up, although we're adding to it. We just went up recently. Again, we didn't really add much to it yet, because obviously we're on hiatus until the COVID crisis has passed. I have my own website, as you can see on the scroll, boblayton.com, but you can also, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So I'm really easy to find. So that's not a problem. Plus, I post art. I try to post artwork every day, because I've been spending the 10 months just going back to doing commissions. And some of them I've been doing in full color now, so there's commissions information on my website. If people are interested in that, because what Dickie said, do something that makes money every day.
Yeah. So if you head over to bit.ly/EXP guest, there's links right now to Bob Layton's website, and there will be a link to Box Monkey Pictures website in just a moment when I can click the update button here, and we will get that live for you. Bob, I want to thank you so much. It's been an honor meeting you, man. This has been one of the highlights of my weekend. It did.
Fast. Oh my God.
That's
You
why I
know?
love talking to comic book people, is because we could just talk for hours and it feels like minutes.
Oh man, I got stories too. I didn't even get into the smutty stuff.
We'll save that for the after hours, Con.
Oh, okay,
Our
gotcha.
interviews.
All right.
Interview
Hey,
later.
listen, give my best to everybody. You know, when you talk to Johnny, give him my love, give him a big hug for me, okay?
We'll do. Absolutely, absolutely. We will be back, guys, in just about a minute with Brian Silverbacks, Charlie Stickney, and Eric Palicki from Scout Comics. Assuming my internet doesn't freeze here at noon.